All right, good evening, everyone. If you're just joining us, we kind of did our quick little background housekeeping sorts of things, and I'm just going to quit talking and get out of the way and introduce our speaker for tonight, Kathleen Tedson. She's got some great stories and a lot of very appropriate information for us to prepare us for this Halloween season. So, Kat, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Amy, and welcome to everyone who has come. I'm very happy to be here virtually. So for the next 50 minutes or so, sit back, relax as I share a few of the investigations from the Haunted Travels of Michigan case files. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with my background, let's get this started. I've traveled, my sister and Bev Rydell and I have traveled across the United States doing investigations on research. We're all about the history. We're all about researching paranormal phenomena and then investigating it. And these are just some of the states that we have been to and I have investigated. There's more. And in addition to that, of course, our time really was focused on Michigan. Pandemic gave me some extra time that I'm not normally used to. So for the first time, I really mapped out most of the locations we investigated, and all the black dots you see on that map show the places that we have been to. I counted over 334 Michigan cases, and that doesn't include the residential cases or the other states. So as you might expect from that, it was a full-time commitment. It wasn't just part-time for fun. So before I go further, I do want to mention my sister Bev Rydell was my favorite best friend and paranormal researcher expert, but she was diagnosed with advanced stage cancer in 2012. She lost that battle in 2015. And now I continue the journey that we started long ago, like I know she would want me to. So the places in Michigan, it's fascinating. There's so much in Michigan that is unexplained. And I'm going to share a little bit of what I know and some of the experiences. Now, there are some terms that I'll be using. Some of you may know these, some of you may not. There is something called an EVP. I'll be talking about that. It's an electronic voice phenomenon. It is a low decibel sound, possibly a spirit voice, that's too low for our ears to hear. But we can capture it in an audio recorder. We can take that audio file, put it into software, do some noise reduction and enhance the sound. And that's sometimes when we can hear the responses to questions that we didn't know we were being given. The other thing we use on investigations, a frequent tool, is something called an Emf Meter. That's an electromagnetic field detector. There are different names for it. There are K2 meters, Mel meters, radiation meters, but they all do one thing. It's a device that measures the electromagnetic fields in the atmosphere. And it's believed that when a spirit or conscious energy enters a room, it will disrupt the natural flow of EMF, and the meter will identify the change. Now, I'm telling you this because I'm pretty hardcore objective in this process, but EMF elevations alone don't validate a paranormal event. We need to record it, record it, record it. There's also so much other new equipment being introduced by paranormal teams and electricians and other tech experts. I've used most of those others, but in all honesty, I'm still questioning their effectiveness. And bottom line is audio seems to be still the most tried and true in a sense. Now, for us, for me, to understand a haunting, you have to understand the history. It's all about the history, whenever you can, history. Now, the problem is there are some cases where the history is simply lost to time. But I'm going to present at least the next case where history tells everything. What we're trying to do is put together the pieces of the puzzle. We know we're not going to get all the pieces together, we just can't. but we're trying to get enough pieces in there so we can see what the image is. We know what's going on. And this case that I'm taking you to right now in Waterford is just such a case. It was a small bed and breakfast, actually, carriage house bed and breakfast, built in 1865. And it has quite an interesting history to it, layers. And when we went there, the only thing we really knew about it is that there was a child spirit haunting it, or at least they thought. They saw little shadow people or a shadow person running down the hallways. They heard a child's voice in the kitchen. They weren't sure why the kitchen. And there was a display of 18th century children's clothing in an upstairs room. And many times the innkeeper would come in the morning. There had been nobody there the night before. And she'd go into this room and she would find the children's clothing disrupted on the wall. Sometimes it would be thrown on the ground. Other times it would be askew on the wall. So, and it's for those reasons they thought one of the primary hauntings was this child. The investigation began, and like most investigations, it wasn't super exciting. It certainly wasn't like you might see on TV today. But we had a few interesting EMF elevations, and we did think we heard a voice or two. We went back the next day, and what we would find out, to our surprise, is the best EVP we recorded was after the investigation was over. It was the end of the night, probably 2 a.m. We were there with 2 great investigators, Robert and Sherry Dowd, and we were wrapping up. There were some people out putting cameras and video equipment away, and a few of us were just sitting in the kitchen. And that's when this EVP was recorded.
We're sitting around the computer, watching the kids play Call of Duty.
We believe that says, "I got chills from the milk," and it sounds like a child. I'll play that again. I got chills from the milk. What in the world is that? That was probably one of the most perplexing EVPs we have recorded in quite a while. And we were wondering, is it possible to even find history associated with this? The other EVPs, there were 2 others, they were very vague, so we couldn't really pull from that. But this one was very specific and very strange. And so we went back in the history like we always do. The first owners were William and Emily Tilden. Now, William served in the Civil War. He contracted a disease and died shortly after returning home. Emily remarried a man by the name of Lorenzo Streeter, and they had a child named Ferdinand. Ferdinand was raised in that home, and when he grew up, he became a pharmacist. He married a lovely lady by the name of Allison or Allie, and they had a son they named Ferdinand Jr. Now, the elder Ferdinand became a pharmacist, and he worked in Detroit, so of course his family lived in Detroit, but they kept the Waterford home because it was in the country. Back then, Waterford was farms and country and a wonderful, healthy place for his family. So they would often travel to the Waterford home after a week in Detroit. Well, the 1890s came, and it was a terrible time for pandemic, as some of us know today. But in one way, it was worse because it wasn't just one terrible virus or disease, it was multiple. And back then, it was the kinds of diseases and viruses that affected children. There was scarlet fever, diphtheria, typhoid, measles, and terrible influenzas as well. Ferdinand became concerned about his son because so much of it affected children. So his wife and him decided that they would move out, or at least the wife and child, to Waterford. It was farm, healthy, fresh air, fresh vegetables and fruits, that he'd be safe. Unfortunately, Ferdinand made a mistake because according to the death records, little Ferdinand, age 7, died from scarlet fever. Now, research. What are the symptoms of scarlet fever? Very high fever, severe chills, so much so that they would just generally shake their whole bodies. One of the first symptoms of scarlet fever was a sore throat, common to all illnesses. The simple remedy back in those days was milk. Give the child milk. Glycerin and a little hot milk will relieve a bad sore throat and a cold. So the mother probably gave her son a little hot milk thinking that would do it, but it didn't. Because as it would turn out, scarlet fever comes from the cow. What they didn't realize back then, and what led eventually to milk being pasteurized, is that the farmers would go out there and milk cows the old-fashioned way. They might have scarlet fever, but for an adult, scarlet fever was just a bad cold. And they might cough into their hands and continue milking the cow. Now the milk is infected, warm milk. The bucket is placed in a larger vat, and before you know it, the entire vat is contaminated. And what they found back then eventually is that milk transmitted many of the diseases back in that time. And again, that led eventually to pasteurization, but not in this case. So we have to put the pieces of the puzzle together now. The little boy says, I got chills from the milk. It seems likely that when he came home one day, he said, Mom, my throat really hurts. So the mother gave him the typical remedy, which is hot milk. It wasn't long after that the chills hit really bad and he got so sick. And they probably called the doctor. His father was there and they're talking about what's going on. And the doctor said he's got scarlet fever. I can imagine the mother or father saying, how is this possible? He's out here, it's fresh, it's healthy. And the doctor said, the milk. Now the little boy doesn't know what's going on. He's really sick. All he knows is that he has terrible chills and he got it from the milk. And why did the EVP occur in the kitchen? Well, back in those days, the kitchen was the warmest place in the house. And when you had someone sick who had terrible chills, the best place was in the kitchen. You put the pieces of the puzzle together, and now we have the sad story of this little voice.
We're sitting there on the computer, watching kids play Call of Duty.
Unfortunately, that was one of the sadder cases that we worked on, but not everything is that intense. I'm going to take you to Mackinac Island now for the next location. Mackinac Island has recently been noted as being the most haunted city in Michigan, if not the United States. And I don't know if that's true, but I can tell you that Mackinac Island has a lot of paranormal phenomenon going on. Now, for a number of about 5, maybe 6 years, my sister Bev and I conducted what we called a haunted weekend on Mackinac Island. It consists of daytime and nighttime investigations, and we brought in a group of people with us to help us with those investigations. And what we discovered is that Mackinac Island is pretty paranormally active. You can go miles from town on some of the back trails, and we recorded EVP and experienced phenomena. Some of the stories from our haunted weekend on Mackinac Island could be read in the third Haunted Travels of Michigan book, Spirits Rising. We also have one story of a lost boy, and that's in Stepping into Darkness. Now, one of the places said to be haunted is Fort Mackinac. Up until 2013, nobody was able to investigate it. So up to then, it was just stories of hauntings. But Bev and I were really honored when, after a lot of work, we managed to get the Mackinac Island Parks and Rec to authorize us to do the very first paranormal investigation of Fort Mackinac. And we did that for 2 or 3 years. And I will tell you, Fort Mackinac in the dark is pretty intense, even for an experienced investigator. Now, did we record a lot of paranormal phenomena at the fort? Well, surprisingly, we did not. We did have some things happen. And I'm going to show 2 EVPs recorded. This one is in the barracks. Now, there was never a battle at Fort Mackinac. No one was killed in battle at the fort, but there was one murder. And there were many cases of deaths through influenza, typhoid fever, a number of different pandemics. The fort does have a hospital, but during these epidemics, the hospitals only had a limited number of beds. So most of the soldiers, when they got sick, they just kind of hunkered down in their bunks and fought through it. And in these two EVPs I'm going to show you, I think we picked up soldiers who were sick. This one's pretty quiet. The EMF elevations begin. You'll hear me reference the one of the meters, and then you'll hear the voice. This one's pretty quiet. The radiation meter just went up to 3. We believe that says it's hard breathing. I'll play it again. The radiation meter just went up to 3. I hope that played well in your system, but that was one. About an hour later, the elevations on the EMF meter again started going crazy. Now, I will say that this next EVP is much louder, and it does say a very bad word. And if there's young children, you may want to ask them to leave the room. I can't control what the spirits are saying. The audio recorder, just for your information, was on the second bed closest to the wall when this was said.
So if you were injured, were you shot? Did you have an illness?
I'm not going to replay that again. Let's just say that he was very sick. So we did have a couple of other EVPs from other locations at the fort. And truthfully, if we want to talk about history and paranormal phenomena, I could probably do an entire presentation on Fort Mackinac, but we don't have that time today. So we're going to move to another location on Mackinac Island called Mission Point Resort. And they say that it's the most haunted resort. Between that and the Grand Hotel, it's like crazy active. Well, when Bev and I were doing the haunted weekends at Mission Point Resort, I can tell you we investigated that whole place a few times. I won't say it's all paranormally active, but there is one place called the Straits Lodge. And honestly, I stayed there, Bev and I stayed there every time we spent the weekend. And there is activity at the Straits Lodge. And why is there activity at the Straits Lodge? Here again, we have a lot of history we can't be sure about. I do know that Mission Point Resort was once Mackinac College. Yes, Mackinac actually had a college, a 4-year college. It ran from about the late 1960s through the early 70s. It didn't last. The students didn't like being locked up on the island in the wintertime. So it did not last. But when it was in operation, it was run by the Moral Rearmament Group, which was a very religious, very structured group of people. So that may have an influence. We believe the Straits Lodge used to be either dorm rooms for the students or for the professors. The other thing that makes this so unique, it's right next to the Mission House. Now, the Mission House is a very historic point on the island. It was built in 1823 by Reverend William Ferry, and you can see there he is there. He looks so happy, doesn't he? He's so not happy. Anyway, he first built a boarding school for Native American children and children of mixed race. So they stayed at that boarding house, and from what I've been able to read, he really had a tight rein on them. It was a tough life for those children. And it later became a hotel, changed hands, but it was always very religious in nature. So I'm not sure, it could be the connection to Native American people on the island or the religious aspects, but Straits Lodge seems to have some activity going on there. And there it is together. Oh, hello there. Let's move forward. Room 2200 at the Straits Lodge has said to be one of the more active locations there. I'm not sure if that's true. My sister and I stayed in room 2200 every time we went to the island, and I can tell you we slept comfortably every night. We were never interrupted by, a ghost or a spirit. But in 2016, we went back, and the atmosphere in that room for some reason was just different. You know, when you investigate enough, you kind of get used to this weird change in the atmosphere when a room is a little different. And in this case, 2200 did have an interesting vibe to it. Earlier in the day, we had a small group of women investigators, and they're running what we call an EVP session. And they started talking very adult, you know, X-rated stuff. I'm not going to play their conversation at all, but during their conversation, this EVP was recorded. We believe the word is Jezebel. Now, Jezebel is a 18th, 19th century term for a woman of loose moral fiber. And I wonder if it might be one of the early religious people in that area not appreciating what those women were talking about. Well, later that same day, I was in there with another group of people, and we were running another EVP session. One of the women had been part of that afternoon's session. And when we got into the room, one of the investigators noticed a shimmering thing coming down the small hallway in room 2200. The EMF meter started just going crazy. And the woman who had been in that room earlier in the afternoon started feeling a burning sensation on her back. So we pulled down her shirt, and we have what we think might be a handprint. I hope it plays well on your computers or your laptops or whatever, but it appears to be a red mark and almost resembles a handprint. And it lasted a couple of hours, and then it went away. I can tell you I've been on hundreds of investigations. This is only one of 2 times that I ever see anyone in any way injured or marked by something we couldn't explain. So that's curious. Again, we have limited time here, so I can't share too much more. I'm going to take you to another favorite location in Michigan, and that's the Traverse City area, one of my favorite places, Old Mission Peninsula. Old Mission Peninsula, I'm sure many of you have been there. It has wonderful wineries, some very nice bed and breakfast, and restaurants as well. This particular one has a reputation, a legend of haunting. It was called Bowers Harbor Inn. It is now Mission Table Restaurant. And it's located really in a very scenic strip of Old Mission Peninsula. Now, the ghost story associated with Mission Table Restaurant. It's the story of Charles and Genevieve Stickney. According to the legend, they lived at this beautiful home on Old Mission Peninsula. As they grew older, Jenny, his wife, became morbidly obese and infirmed and ended up in a wheelchair. Well, to get her up and down the floors, Charles built an elevator. He also hired a nurse. Nobody knew who the nurse was, but she was quite the person, according to this, because she came to take care of Jenny. But her and Charles got into this crazy affair. So the legend goes. Now, according to the legend, Charles dies. And in his last will and testament, Jenny is absolutely shocked. She finds out Charles gave everything, all of his wealth, to the nurse. The only thing he gave Jenny was the Bowers Harbor home. She was devastated, absolutely devastated. And she went into the elevator and hangs herself, according to the legend. Was the story true? I don't know. One of the things I enjoy doing on an investigation is taking the urban legend and finding the truth to it. And surprisingly enough, many times the urban legend has at least a portion of truth to it. And I wondered if this was the case. Now, of course, the legend is that it's Jenny who haunts Mission Table Restaurant, and that her face can be seen sometimes looking down a second-story window. And here's a photograph taken that some believe was the face of Genevieve. Now, Genevieve did have a broader face. She had a broader nose, and I have blown up the image. You can see that there. It kind of resembles the face. But Bev and I got there and thought, well, that doesn't look quite right because that window is actually pretty large. So if it is Jenny, she'd have to really be blown up in spirit and maybe floating a little bit for that to happen. So we went up to the room, and sure enough, it is the lamp. It was a lamp in the room. This is something called pareidolia, and pareidolia makes use of a photograph as validating paranormal phenomena almost impossible. Now, for those who don't know, pareidolia is the tendency of the brain to see or create familiar images from random shapes and colors. It's like if you look up and see a cloud and you say, oh, that looks like a rabbit. Well, it's not a rabbit, but it kind of looks like it. Same thing with the photograph. You can also have audio pareidolia, and that's where you create familiar words from random sounds and white noises, which makes identifying a valid EVP sometimes extremely difficult. Now, we decided to run the investigation. We brought in West Michigan ghost hunters to help us with the investigation. And there were a few interesting little things, some sounds, EMF elevations, but nothing startling. See, the reality behind most paranormal investigations is that it's pretty boring, very quiet. There might be a brief moment, a second, where something happens, which makes it exciting. But in this case, nothing really major happened. It wasn't until we were leaving the place. It's probably 2:33 in the morning, and we were packing up our equipment. The restaurant was locked. The owner left with us. And I had my night vision camera, and I'm just kind of shooting the outside of the building. And to my surprise, one of the lights in the window turned on. And I'll play that for you right now. I've zoomed in on this photograph, but if you see that, you can see the light going on right there. And it's off. Now, there are a lot of natural reasons for that light to go on and off. I just didn't assume it was paranormal. It's an older building. Electricity can have fluctuations in it. Things like that can happen. But I had a sense there might be something. Maybe. I don't know. But we didn't find the real piece of evidence until several days later. West Michigan ghost hunters had carefully reviewed their videos and sent something to me and said, Kat, take a look at this. Now, this was recorded in the Jolly Pumpkin Brewery, which is the oldest section of the restaurant. And it was formerly called the Bowery. There have been visions of like lights shooting from the bar, which you see there. And so West Michigan group had actually stationed a night vision camera overlooking the bar, and they captured this. Now, what I want you to do is pay attention. You see there's an arrow there in the middle of the picture. This object that you'll see floating around actually begins at the bar, but it really becomes most notable right around the place where you see that arrow. So keep your eyes tuned to this. All right, it's coming through. There it is. And it's just moving across. I'll do this in slow motion. Here it comes. It's not a bird. It's not a bug. I brought this video, took this video to videographer professional to see if they had any idea what it was. And they said, no, they had no freaking clue. So it still remains unexplained. But now with a few of the very low-level EVPs we recorded and this particular video, Bev and I were compelled to take the time to do the history and to find out what the real story is behind the legend of Charles and Genevieve Stickney. And what we found is this. The home on Old Mission Peninsula wasn't their full-time residence. It was simply their summer home. They lived at the Patland Hotel, which is now the oldest section of the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel. So Bowers Harbor Inn was just a summer residence. I found this old photograph of Charles and Genevieve, and there's Jenny right there in her late, she's not slender, she's She's not morbidly obese either. And she looks healthy enough to be standing there without a wheelchair or a cane or anything. So now I'm beginning to wonder, all right, what's behind the legend? Bev and I went further and further into it. And we found out that Jenny actually died before Charles. She did not hang herself at the house in Old Mission Peninsula. She died from natural causes, congestive heart failure at the Pentland Hotel. It was Charles who spent his last days at the home. He died 2 years later, died eventually in Munson Hospital, but he had his heart issue that happened while he was at Bowers Harbor Inn. Now, what about this nurse? Oh my gosh, my sister and I spent over a month just trying to find out if there was really a nurse and if, you know, this thing with the affair really happened. And through many leads, eventually we came across Marilyn. Marilyn was the daughter of the nurse. Yes, there was a nurse. And Marilyn told us this amazing story, tragic and yet glorious in some ways. This is a picture of her mom, Catherine, and she was the Stickney nurse. Now, when she first started working for Charles and Genevieve, she had just been through a terrible tragedy. She was a young woman with very young children at the time. Her husband had died in a tragic car accident, and she was left without any money. She was a registered nurse, so she thought she might offer daycare services or in-home services to people. That's when the Stickneys called her and said, you know, we have plenty of room at the Pentland and at our home in Bowers Harbor. Please come with us, live with us, we'll take your children and just care for us because we both need a little bit of help. Actually, Genevieve, with her congestive heart failure, you know, she was slowing down, and Charles was actually the man in the wheelchair. And so it was that Catherine took care of Charles, mostly Charles, and a little bit with Jenny. Now, what Marilyn tells us is there was no affair between Catherine and Charles because, well, first of all, Charles was completely infirmed, and Catherine was very, very young. But what did happen is that Charles and Jenny did not have any children. They had very few relatives anywhere. And they took Catherine and the children under their wing and treated them more like Catherine was their daughter and the kids, well, their grandkids. And Marilyn has many fond memories, especially with Charles. So the will, this is the interesting part. The part of the legend is true. When Charles died, he had no relatives left, nobody. So he gave everything to the nurse, everything, including the home on Old Mission Peninsula. And Marilyn to this day talks praises to Charles because he saved both her mother and her brother from poverty. They lived happily for the rest of their lives, never worried about money, all because of Stickney, Charles Stickney. Now, of course, we couldn't complete the interview without asking Marilyn, was there ever any creepy things going on, anything weird or strange? And this is Marilyn's response.
I never saw anything out of the ordinary or heard anything out of the ordinary, but my mom was a very sensitive person, and maybe she did, but she always thought there was something, there might have been something.
There was something, there might have been something. We talked to Marilyn quite a bit about that. And what she said is that her mother felt strange things in the home, especially the oldest section. When she lived there, Jenny did all of her canning. Jenny did a lot of canning. So the oldest section of the home was there for her canning, and Marilyn did not like to go there. And also, not Marilyn, Catherine. And Catherine had also told her that she felt something in the main part of the house, but it was mostly the older section. And this is while Charles and Jenny are still alive. So now we realize, well, if Catherine is sensing something in the oldest part of the home, we better go back in time. We went back to Bowers Harbor again for another look through and investigation. And during that time, one of the staff members said, you got to come and see this. They took us to the back of the home under a staircase, but I bet few people see today. They found this. It was a heart embedded in the foundation of the home. This was the oldest section of the home. Who put that heart in there and why? We went further back, and this wasn't easy, but we came up with Chester and Betsy Hartson, one of the earliest settlers of Old Mission Peninsula back in the 1840s. They built the first home there. That is their heart. That is the foundation of the first home. They had 8 children. They had a cherry orchard that made them a living. Betsy Ann died February 18th, 1898, at quite an elderly age. Chester died 2 weeks later. His obit said he died from a broken heart. But what the obit also said is that both Betsy and Chester died in the place they most wanted to be, their wonderful home on Old Mission Peninsula. So who is haunting? It's hard to say, really. We don't have enough history here, but I can tell you this, that Charles and Genevieve, along with Chester and Betsy, 2 different couples from 2 different walks of life, but all shared a common love of this home in beautiful Old Mission Peninsula. It's one of those stories I'm still very close to because we spent so much time on this. This last case I want to share with you is very different. It's a private residential case. I don't normally share cases that are residential because of privacy issues, but this one was so remarkable that I thought you would want to hear it. And I have, for your knowledge, changed the names of the people involved for their privacy. You will hear the woman's voice who's involved, and I've changed her voice also, but there's an EVP. I don't touch the EVPs, but the voices have been changed. Now, getting to the story, for most of us, when we look at a haunted house, we think of something like this, old, dilapidated, maybe Victorian or Romanesque castle-like. These are all kind of creepy. But very few of us would be traveling down middle-class suburbia and see a home like this and say, that has to be crazy with ghosts in it. No, you wouldn't. It was like this, that was the site of this remarkable case I'm about to share with you. It started at around 11 o'clock at night on a cold February night. The office phone rang. Now I work out of my home, so I have a home office. I heard the phone ringing. I wouldn't normally pick up the phone, but for some reason that night I did. And on the other side was this frantic woman named Linda. Something horrible had happened in her home, and she wasn't going to go back to it until Bev and I could get out there. She was staying with her friend Brenda right now. So I asked her what was going on, and she told me this fantastical story. According to Linda, she'd been out to dinner with friends and had come back, was just sitting in her chair watching TV when she heard, it sounded like footsteps running around her pool table in the rec room at the back of her house. Now, there had been some kids in the neighborhood that had done some breaking in, home break-ins, and she wondered if that's what happened there. So she quickly stood up and shouted, "Who's there?" Where to her horror, the running footsteps got louder and louder until she told us it sounded like a cattle stampede. It was so loud, and the house was trembling, just like the movie, she said. And she was so terrified, she grabbed her cell phone and just ran out of the house and called her friend Brenda and said, "Oh my God," and she explained what happened. Brenda said, "Well, just get over here. Don't go back in that house." Well, she was going to do just that until she realized she was in her pajamas. She didn't have shoes on. She didn't have her coat. She didn't have her purse. More importantly, she didn't have her car keys. She had to go back in the house. So she looked through the picture window of her house and everything looked okay in the front room. So she kind of scooted in. And the sound that had been on the first floor, she could hear it now rumbling around, moving around on the upper floor. So she ran into the kitchen, and the kitchen and dining room are connected. And she said she just stopped in horror. Everything was a wreck. Her dining room, she has this huge oak table that seats 10 easily. The chairs had been pulled out and were facing each other. There was a linen tablecloth that had been bunched up in the middle and the candlesticks untouched. There were large ceramic bowls she'd had in her kitchen, and they had fallen to the floor. She couldn't believe it. She took her a moment or two, but she got herself together. She had to get out of there. So she grabbed her shoes, her coat. She had to go to the closet. She got her keys, and she's about ready to leave, and she has to pass by the basement door to do that. And as she's passing by the basement door, she hears a loud noise. And she told me, I don't know why I did it. I stopped, I turned on the light, I looked down the basement, and to my horror, to her horror, the entire ceiling had collapsed, and the beams that held the tiles together were slowly swinging back and forth. She slammed the door. That's when she heard 3 loud sounds and the sounds of boot steps coming up the stairs. That's all she needed. She got out, she went to Brenda's, and that's what caused her to call us. So I told her Bev and I would be out the next day. We'd meet her at her home, and that she shouldn't touch anything. Well, when we got there, everything was perfect. Everything was in order. And I said, everything was great. And she said, oh, I know. I just couldn't stand looking at it. So Brenda and I just tidied up. Well, I gave Bev, a look, and she gave me one back too. We've done a lot of residential cases, and unfortunately, sometimes they overstate the problem. They really want ghost hunters to come in and entertain them, I guess. We didn't say anything to Linda about that, but we wondered, okay, is this one of those? And Linda quickly corrected herself. No, I'm sorry I did it. But she said, go in the basement, you'll see there's the ceiling. So we went down there, and sure enough, the entire ceiling was in pieces on the floor. And what Bev and I found extremely interesting is the beams that were holding up the tiles were not cut. They were not pulled down. They were twisted on either end, the far ends, dozens of times. And that's what caused them to break off. That was very strange. So we went up to talk to Linda and asked her, tell us a little more about what happened. When did it start? The typical interview that we do. And that's when she told us this incredibly tragic story. It began about 2.5 years ago, she thought. It was then that her son, her 35-year-old son, was visiting for Christmas. A terrible snowstorm, ice storm hit. When he was ready to leave, she told him, stay here, don't go. Your room is upstairs still. I have, clean sheets on it. Just be safe, don't go. And he just laughed, kissed her on the cheek and said, oh, Mommy, you worry too much. And he left. And as fate would have it, his car skidded on the ice, flipped over many times, caught fire, and he died in the flames. And Linda blamed herself. We looked around the family room, or the great room where she was at, and we saw pictures of him everywhere. It still bothered her. She still blamed herself. She said she cried frequently. And the first account started, she said, the first Thanksgiving after his passing. She was home making dinner for her family, and she heard a voice in her ear, and it said, hi, Mommy. Yes, her son was 35, but he called her Mommy. It was, one of those cute things he did. She turned around, and she was alone. And that's when she said, oh, it's just my imagination. Well, they had a wonderful dinner with the family. And it was in the days that followed where things started to change. She started hearing small sounds. Then the sounds grew a little louder. She thought she was hearing voices, and she looked at Bev and I and said, no, seriously, I thought I was going crazy. And then to top it off, she started seeing these shadows. And she said, it's the craziest thing, but they're like inky black. And she would barely see them, but she could see them. And they had like a head shape, but the rest was just flowing black. And they'd scoot around corners and up the stairs. She couldn't figure it out. And she said, do you think I'm going crazy? Well, of course, we never thought that, because we've heard some pretty strange stories. We didn't know, though, so we told her we'd come back. We scheduled a date for an investigation, and we listened to the interview. We recorded it, of course. And that's when we got some EVPs. And that's when we knew there might be something here. I'm going to play this first EVP. It is quiet. You will have to pay attention. Or maybe I won't. Let's try this again.
movies where a herd of buffalo are going over the prairie and they're running and you hear the earth roaring under them.
We believe it says, I did it. Play it again.
Movies where a herd of buffalo are going over the prairie and they're running and you hear the earth roaring under them.
And there was a second one about a half hour later. Linda's sharing more of the experiences that she's had at her house when this was recorded. We believe that says they heard enough. I'll play it again. So we went back, we conducted at least 3 or 4 other investigations, both in the daytime and nighttime. And nothing happened. It was perfectly quiet, no EMF elevations, no unusual sounds or noises were heard. But inevitably, a few days after we would go, Linda would call us and said, oh my gosh, you guys, you know, a day after you came, it just started going crazy again. So we tried another investigation. It always seemed to occur while Linda was home alone in that big chair of hers. So we came over, we gave her an audio recorder, let her sit in her chair, and Bev and I sat in the back by the rec room. And we had her ask questions. And that's when the EVPs came, and there were several. I'm not going to play most of them for you because they're of a very highly personal nature, but I am going to play this one defining EVP.
You want to come back to me?
Now, this is one of those very quiet ones. You know, with headphones, it was pretty clear. I believe it says, Mommy, it's me. There's a pause. And then you hear, I love you. Play it again. Mommy, it's me. I love you. We presented Linda with the evidence we had recorded. She heard the voices. And she said, it's my son. It's my son. This last message really affected her. And she looked to the skies and said, I love you too, baby. It got quiet after that. Linda didn't have much activity in the home. I called her about 2 or 3 weeks later. She said, it seems to be good. I will tell you that that session where we revealed the evidence was very emotional for Linda and for us. But it was also this happy moment because she knew her son was there. It was okay. It wasn't something awful wicked. In any event, we thought things were good. About a month later, however, Linda called us and she said to me, she said, Kat, it's crazy what's going on here. My daughter came for Easter and she was upstairs. She spent the night. She took a shower in my room, in the bathroom up there. And she said from the steamy mirror, she saw this crazy thing. It looked like a circle within a circle within a circle in the mirror. And it almost looked 3-dimensional, she said. Linda continued to explain that she tried to clean it off and it wouldn't go. I told her I could come over and look at it. And she said, no, I'm leaving for Florida in a couple of days. If it's still there when I come back, I'll call you. But I just wanted you to know this strange thing. And she also told me one other thing. I'm also a little concerned, is what she said. I think I'm seeing those black shadows still. And I said, well, we can talk about it when you return. So didn't last 2 weeks. In fact, she called me about a day later. She was in her car in the driveway. Brenda was with her. And she said, oh my gosh, Kat, I'm here. I need to get my luggage. And I saw these things go past my picture window, these black inky shapes. It had a head, but the body was really undefined, and she saw them passing in front of her picture window slowly. And her front door had a window in it. And she said she could follow these darn things as they went upstairs. And she said, my luggage is on the second stairs. I don't want to deal with this anymore. What should I do? And I said, well, I can come over. She didn't want that. She didn't want to wait. She just wanted her luggage. And I said, I'll stay with you on the phone. I didn't know what else to do. So I'm on the phone with her. I can tell you, Brenda, her friend, was not at all happy going in there, but they did. And I heard Brenda saying, come on, let's go, let's go. So they got in the back where her bedroom was, and they're fumbling around with luggage. And apparently Linda had quite a bit of luggage she was taking, and Brenda wasn't happy. But they managed to struggle it down the hall real quickly. And Linda saying, it's quiet, I don't see anything. It's okay, it's gonna be okay. And then she stopped in front of the bathroom and she said, Kat, I'm gonna look in there. I'm gonna see if that circle thing is still there. And I said, sure, go ahead. So she did. And she said, it's almost gone. I barely see it now. I said, well, that's a good thing. Enjoy your vacation. So she did. And I didn't hear from her again for some time. I called her, I don't know, a month or so later. She said everything was quiet. Everything was back to normal. And it was good. Now, what happened here? Well, clearly, this is one of those cases where history is more involved with Linda than, archival history. And can we figure out what happened? Well, it's all conjecture on our part, but I think what probably happened when we are in a deep emotional state, whether it's grief or anger or fear, electrode charges from our body, from our brain are massive. I think it's possible Linda calling out to her son as often as she did, begging him to come back and give her a message. The grief that she was dealing with may have opened a vortex, and she brought her son back from the other side. But we don't know what exists with her son on the other side. And I think these Black entities might be things that exist within that other dimension. And these Black things may look creepy and scary to us, but it doesn't mean that they are. Anyway, her son came back, tried to give her a message that Thanksgiving when he said, hi, mommy. When she wouldn't respond to it, the noises started, the voices that she heard. And perhaps her son got more frustrated that, come on, you gotta know. So finally, when he left his message and he knew she had gotten it, she could feel and energy, could possibly feel that energy level subsiding with the relief Linda felt. He went back through the tear, through that vortex. But these little dark things, well, they may have gotten a little lost. They were still hanging around. So the vortex opened again. Perhaps her son called them back, which they went. The vortex closed and everything is at peace. I talked to Linda again about a year after that, and she was fine. She was happy. She never heard from her son again, but she said that was okay. Because first of all, she knew she wasn't crazy. But more importantly, she knew wherever he was okay. And she knew that he still loved her. And this story was called The Last Goodbye. And that concludes my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Wow, okay. I don't think I'm going to be sleeping well tonight. Thank you so much for that, Kat. That last one especially.
Yes.
Feel free, if you have questions, you can pop them in the chat or unmute yourself. We're glad to hear from you either way.
I know there's questions out there. I know you have them.
I see we've got one in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see it, so I'll just read it for you. It says, have you heard anything about the Keeler Brass Building downtown Grand Rapids?
I haven't investigated that location, but I've heard about it. I'd like to get in there, actually. If you can get me in, let me know.
This is Ken. I have a question.
Sure, I can hear you, Ken.
Great. When is your next book coming out? Your fans are chomping at the bit.
You want to know when my next book is coming out? I'm working on 2 right now. The first is called Abandoned Places, Haunted Spaces. So what I'm doing is looking at locations that were once homes that nobody lives at or other buildings, and doing a lot of historical research and running EVP sessions. So that's in progress. I think that's going to take a lot of time to finish, probably another year. And I've also got a second book called Haunted Romeo that I'm working on. So I'm hoping to have the next book out within the next year. It depends on how the research goes. It's pretty time consuming, but that's my goal.
It's a really good answer. I can probably hold off for a year. I just didn't want to hear that 3, 4, 5.
No, not 3, 4. Gosh, I hope not. I would like to get the next. I know my publisher's kind of been nagging me a little bit too. So yeah, I do hope to get something out in about a year.
Good deal. Thank you. That's awesome.
Awesome, Ken.
Do you have any places that are kind of on your wish list for places you'd like to get into? I know you mentioned Fort Mackinac took some time to get into.
Yes, yes. Not really. I mean, I've investigated so many of what's deemed the most haunted places in Michigan. I'm always open up to new places, but as far as other locations across the US, yeah, there's a few places I'd like to get into, but most of Michigan I've covered, even though the UP has an asylum I would like to get into, an orphan asylum. It's an abandoned building, and I would love that to be part of the next book. So I'm kind of working on the orphanage up in the UP. I can tell you, for those watching, that I have investigated the Felt Mansion and oh gosh, Henderson Castle. Those are reputedly very haunted locations, and I've been there 3 or 4 times, and honestly, I've never recorded anything or experienced anything paranormal there, but they're fantastic places. So, you know, if you're in the area, stop by. Even though with Felt Mansion, I think it's more events. You just can't get in there to look around, but they're beautiful places. I'm always open, by the way, to look at a haunted location. So if there's anyone out there that wants to contact me, the website you can see at the bottom of the slide there. Check out the website, shoot me out an email and tell me about the location. And if you can get us in there, you can join us on the investigation. Anyone else with a question?
Well, while they're quiet, I'll fill in the space here for a minute while they're thinking of other questions. How long does it take? I know in your book you talk a lot about how tedious the kind of reviewing all the hours of footage and things. Like, how long does it really take for, I mean, not even including the history part, because I'm sure there's a lot of research as well, but how long does it take from the time you sit down and do the investigation itself to, you know, going through all of the recording to kind of have those findings?
Well, it depends on how many hours of audio we have, and we have audio running the whole time, which means at least 8 hours of audio, but we don't just have one audio recorder. We may have 3 or 4. So if we have, let's say, 24 hours of audio and 16 hours of video, you can add the time frame up. That's how long for the first go through. But then we go through it a second time. And then once we capture or pull out what we think are EVPs, then we go in and see if the white noise reduction can bring us something. So it can literally take us days or weeks to really get a solid evaluation of what was recorded. And with history, you mentioned that, gosh, months. It will take us months and dedicated. In fact, there is a story in the very first Haunted Travels of Michigan book. It was the Whitney restaurant. And I just found something, a piece of evidence, a piece of historical research that identifies clearly what is paranormally active on the second floor of the Whitney building. And it's not what I thought it was. You know, the first book, one of the first cases I ever worked on was the Whitney restaurant in Detroit. That was the site of my first paranormal event. And who I thought was active on the second floor, I think now I know for sure what is. And I need to, my publisher is not sure if they want to do a rewrite on that, but I'd love to, because that actually took a whole year to find the answer. But the second book, we had the Haunted Travels of Michigan 2, what a creative name that is. We did a case of the Holly Demon, and that Holly Demon case took us probably 3 months of research. And, you know, it's not just a few hours a day. We got to know libraries really well, microfiche. A lot of libraries are still using microfiche. We accessed our historical archives online, very useful too, and talked to a lot of people. So it's in depth. Between the video and the audio and the research, it was really an incredible commitment of time.
Couple of questions in the chat. First one is, have you researched Sault Ste. Marie? I did a tour there about all the places where ghosts have been seen.
Yes, I have done some research in Sault Ste. Marie, and believe it or not, I've never investigated a place there, which I would love to. You know, if I've got a spot there we can do what we call a controlled investigation, I'd love to do it. There's so many places in Michigan that are haunted, reputedly. Even though what I have found is what they call the most haunted spots in Michigan sometimes aren't, and that the ones you least expect to be active are. So I'd love to get in Sault Ste. Marie. Thanks for bringing it up. If you can get us in there, check out the website, shoot me an email and see what we can get going. Thanks.
The other chat question, speaking of places you wouldn't expect, it says, can you disclose where the residence you told about is located?
I can't give you a specific, but it is north of Detroit, Michigan. Because it's a residential case, I don't want this person being identified.
Comes another one. Let's see. How did you and your sister get involved with the paranormal? Was it an interest, feelings you had, extra sensitivity? Just curious.
That's a good question. We really got involved with the paranormal when we went to the Whitney restaurant. Initially, my husband, my sister, and I went to the Whitney. My husband got a raise, a big raise, and he took us to the Whitney, wonderful restaurant. And so he took us there, and afterwards, we just kind of toured ourselves around the home. And it was there, my sister was taking pictures because it's quite beautiful. And she had this one photograph, it's in the first book, the first Haunted Travels of Michigan book, that was just the craziest thing we'd ever seen. Nobody has been able at this point to tell us what that photograph is, which is only one of two photographs I've ever seen that I deem very likely paranormal. So that drove us back to the Whitney to see if we could explain that photograph. And it is at the Whitney that I had my first paranormal experience. And for those who have had a paranormal experience, it's kind of life-changing. And that is what brought us on this journey all those years.
All right, we're kind of getting pushing our time limit here. So any last questions, anything that we can solve for anyone before we call it a night?
Well, one thing I should bring in, as people are thinking, if anybody out there is experiencing paranormal phenomena, and you're afraid, the most important thing you can do is calm your mind. What I have found, the one thing that is consistent, if you calm the mind, you will calm the haunting. It's very often us that stimulates paranormal activity, our fear, our anticipation. So if you're experiencing something strange or unsettling, put yourself in a happy place. Think of yourself, I don't know, on the beach on a beautiful day and you can hear the waves. Or if you're a biker person, get yourself on that bike on a beautiful winding road somewhere in the country. Put yourself in a happy place. I have found it very often helps resolve the issue.
All right, one more comment in the chat. Just wonderful presentation. Thank you. And that sounds like a pretty good spot to kind of wind things up tonight. Thanks, Kathleen, so much for sharing your experiences. It's just amazing to hear all of the stories. And I highly suggest, if anyone's interested, you pick these books up. Like I said, I've read through a couple of them, and you get great history along with some really fascinating stories, and not just, you know, this Halloween time of year. These are, you know, really interesting historical travel stories, really. I mean, it's all about the whole state. So stop by the library, pick up your copies, stop at the Book Nook, look up your Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your books, and pick those up. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. Take care, and happy Halloween. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night.